Good morning, Year 9. So today what we're going to be doing is we're going to be moving on to our new module. We have now finished World War II just before Easter, and our new module is about the modern world and how it was formed. So the first thing I suggest you do is write today's date and title and make sure you've underlined it. Now, alongside this video, you should be working through the booklet, which is uploaded onto the Home Learning Resource Centre as well. So the first thing I think you should do is, once you've done your date and title, is start to look at task 1, which is the key definitions, because what we're going to be looking at in today's lesson is how India was formed in the way that we know India today. So I suggest you pause the video here and have a go at doing task 1. Now, what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be reading through the textbook in this video and hopefully giving you a little bit more of an explanation as to what was happening and helping you with any keywords that you might not be understanding. So if you want to read along, there is a copy again on the system for you to follow through, or you can just follow me whilst I'm going through the video. So today's lesson is about decolonising India. After the Second World War, the European colonial empires began to collapse. The largest of these empires was the British, whose 2-century-long rule of England was coming to an end. 6 years of warfare had left the French, Dutch, Italians and British severely weakened. Rebuilding their own countries would be hard, but hanging on to their overseas colonies would prove impossible. Independence movements were pushing for power all across Asia and Africa. It soon began clear that the Second World War had brought the age of European imperialism to an end. And this is because, obviously, after the Second World War, all of the European countries that were involved are trying to rebuild their country up. So that means rebuilding their economy up. Obviously, they've lost a lot of people as well. And the people of each of these different countries have started to want different things. And actually, the government would find it really, really difficult to not only kind of look after their own country, but as well as looking after the other colonies. So, Indian nationalism. Indian tax revenue provided the British Empire with a vital income, while Indian troops were key to its defence. In the First World War, no fewer than 1.3 million Indian soldiers and labourers fought and worked for the British Empire. But the Raj, which is basically what is known as kind of India whilst it was ruled by Britain, but the Raj was already being undermined from within by a steadily growing nationalist movement. Now, nationalist is basically a group of people who are loyal to their country. Now, in the First World War, it was Indian soldiers, but it wasn't just Indian soldiers. There were other soldiers from different countries that were part of the British Empire, for example, Australia as well. So, this movement was based in the Indian National Congress, often called the Congress Party, a predominantly Hindu political group founded in 1885. Though it still pledged unswerving loyalty to the British Crown, the British authorities viewed the Congress Party as a threat and refused to cooperate with it. During the First World War, Prime Minister David Lloyd George, this is the British Prime Minister, drew up plans to introduce complete self-government for India gradually, whilst keeping it within the empire. In 1919, however, the British administration in India not only failed to honour these promises of self-government, but passed a law called the Rowlatt Act that allowed Indian activists to be arrested and imprisoned indefinitely without trial. Riots broke out in response. At Amritsar on 13th of April, Colonel Reginald Dyer ordered his troops to fire upon a crowd of unarmed protesters. Over 400 Indians were killed. The Amritsar massacre remains one of the most notorious atrocities in the history of British colonial rule. Now, so it does kind of, just to re-go over this paragraph, we've got the British government obviously trying to come up with some way where India has some sort of control in its own country, but that India still remains part of the British Empire. And that's partly due to India kind of being seen as the jewel of the British Empire because of this, all the trade routes and everything that they could trade with India. And this massacre that happens in Amritsar, which is in North India, it's kind of very famous and well known in the sense that it's because there were the troops fired on unarmed protesters, so they were innocent people. So after Amritsar, Indian nationalism became focused and radicalised, as many Indians concluded that the British would only give up control of India when forced to. The man who now emerged as leader of the independence movement was a Hindu lawyer and activist named Mohandas Gandhi. He was known by the honorary title of Mahatma, meaning great soul. Gandhi led a campaign of civil disobedience, which included strikes, boycotts of British courts and schools, refusal to serve in British government jobs, refusal to pay taxes, sitting and blocking streets, and hunger strikes in prison. Gandhi's non-violent strategy became an inspiration to independence movements across the world. For many Indians, he came to be viewed as almost a holy man. Now, the kind of main point you need to understand about this is that the Amritsar massacre actually means that the Indians then became a lot more focused, and they realised that they weren't going to get full independence like they wanted to unless they really fought for it. And because of this, we have a leader that kind of steps up, Mahatma Gandhi, and he's known for the reason he's very famous is because of his non-violent strategies to trying to get India independence. Now, we're looking at India today, but next week we will be looking at what happens in America, and it's a similar style where we've got protesters fighting in non-violent ways to try and get freedom and independence. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to quickly scroll up so you can see. I'm just going to go through this Indian rule box. So George Curzon, British Viceroy of India. A Viceroy is basically somebody who's looking after India, representing the British Crown. So George Curzon, British Viceroy of India, at the dawn of the 20th century once declared, "As long as we rule India, we are the greatest power in the world. If we lose it, we shall drop straight away to a third-rate power." So it's just re-emphasising actually how important it was for the British to keep hold of India and not actually let India leave the British Empire. Now, obviously, in India, we know that the British kind of had they were ruling over Britain, but there were other kind of problems or concerns that were happening within India itself. So, divide and rule. Many Indians suspected the British of pursuing a divide and rule strategy, controlling India by discouraging Hindus and Muslims from uniting against them. The most controversial example was Lord Curzon's proposal in 1905 to partition the province of Bengal, dividing it into a Hindu majority province and a Muslim majority province. The British claimed that the purpose was to protect the Muslim minority from a repressive Hindu majority, but the policies often had the effect of fueling tension and resentment between the two major religion communities in India. So actually what has kind of happened for years as well, and it's something that is exaggerated, is the kind of tension between Hindus and Muslims living in India. So initially, kind of before they've got independence, it's pretty much a mix of Hindus and Muslims living together. But there are some kind of tensions and there is a bit of resentment between them. And what we'll find out is what actually happens to them once they get independence. So at this point, I suggest you stop the video, pause it rather, and have a go at task 3, which is answering question 1 to 3. So from what we've read, you should be able to answer question 1, 2 and 3 now. Right, just bear with me. Oops. So what I'm going to do now is go through, there we are, sorry. I'm going to go through and start reading the second page. So, Gandhi's leadership and prestige also helped to hold the nationalist movement together, smoothing over divisions between Hindu and Muslim activists. Activists are obviously people who are fighting to get their view and opinion heard, and what they believe in. Despite this, by 1930, Muslim nationalists were arguing that when independence was won, there should be a separate nation for Muslims created in India's northwest. So actually, like I was saying about the tensions between Hindus and Muslims, the Muslims wanted their own nation that was completely separate to India. Now, when Japanese armies advanced across Asia in 1942, so we've already seen this in a previous lesson, that the Japanese during World War II, they were trying to create their own empire for the sake of having resources and power in Southeast Asia. Okay, So this is kind of happening at the same time. So, when Japanese armies advanced across Asia in 1942, the Congress Party called upon Britain for immediate independence by passing the Quit India Resolution. In response, the British arrested tens of thousands of Congress leaders, including Gandhi, and banned the Congress Party. Protests erupted across India, and over 100,000 people were imprisoned. The British ruled India under martial law for the remainder of the war. In the process, they oversaw a devastating famine in Bengal in 1943, in which around 3 million Indians died. Many Indians blamed the famine on British occupation policy, which involved printing money to pay for wartime costs and thus driving up prices uncontrollably. What that is essentially an inflation, when lots of money is being printed because the country needs lots of money, but they don't actually have it, so they're printing lots and lots. And because there's lots of money in circulation in a country, that will mean that the prices will go up dramatically. Now, India's independence. So, when Clement Attlee's government, so the British Prime Minister, came to power in 1945, it offered full independence to India and declared that it would hand over control no later than June 1948. So actually, after the Second World War, when Clement Attlee's government, a Labour government, come into power, they promised that they will give complete independence to India within 3 years, rather. This extremely short timetable prompted both Hindu and Muslim nationalists to push for the partition of India into separate nations, having no time to negotiate a compromise that might have held them together. As a result, on 15th of August 1947, two new nations came into being, India and Pakistan. Immediately, there were massive population transfers, as Hindus and Muslims migrated between the two countries to ensure they lived under a government of their own religion. In areas where minorities were left stranded, tens of thousands of people were massacred. Gandhi himself was assassinated in January 1948 by a Hindu extremist for attempting to halt the violence. So, as soon as India is given its independence, actually you get two new nations being created, India and Pakistan, and they are completely free from British rule. So they rule by themselves completely independently. Now, like I said, previously, before they'd got independence, India was actually a big country where Hindus and Muslims both live side by side. Now, the creation of this new nation means that part of India has been kind of almost sided off to create this brand new nation, which is Pakistan. And a lot of people wanted to make sure that they were living in a country that was following their own religious beliefs. So they moved quite dramatically. So like you can see actually in this picture, you've got lots and lots of people on this train desperate to get to the nation that is supporting their own religious beliefs. And unfortunately, some people weren't able to do this really quickly, and they were massacred because they weren't seen as to be welcome in that nation anymore. Right. So, and like it says, obviously Gandhi himself, he's murdered by Hindu extremists just a couple of months after gaining India's independence. So, you should now actually be able to answer question 4 and 5, which is task 3. The questions are here at the bottom of the page, but they are also in your booklet for you to be able to answer. Now, once you have done that, what you need to do is you need to go through the booklet and complete task 4 and 5. Just to explain, because it is a little bit different this time, task 5 is the paragraph that you need to be writing. So normally, the way we do it in school, we do a reading lesson and a writing lesson. This is almost like an extended lesson where you're going to be doing the writing task as well. The writing task is task 5. However, all of your teachers should have emailed you out a link. That link is so that you can do an online quiz to check your knowledge. So you need to complete all those questions, and at the last question on that quiz is where you should write your paragraph. That means that your teacher will be able to A, check your knowledge from today's lesson, and B, they should be able to check the paragraph that you have wrote. Okay? The stuff that's in the booklet, you still do need to be completing it because you still need to understand what has happened. Right, so The booklet does have the instructions, and you can obviously replay this video as many times as you like. Thank you, Year 9.